Hello, hello, hello. What's up, Puremix Live? We are back with another question and answer session, and today we're going to be talking to the one, the only, John Paterno. How you doing today, John?
I'm doing well, Ben. How are you?
Doing pretty good, man. I'm here in New York. I'm in the dangerous room, as you can see behind me, here at Flux Studios. Where are you at?
I'm in my little room in Culver City. Yeah.
Nice, man. Coast to coast. I like it.
Nope, definitely.
Cool. So let's dig right in, man. We put out a questionnaire. We got a lot of responses from the Puremix community, from a lot of our pro members, and they sent in a ton of questions. So
Excellent.
I've kind of organized them. It was really interesting though, seeing like there's a lot of kind of common questions that people have. So let's see.
Cool.
Let's see if we can get some answers out of you. What do you think?
Hey, happy to do the best I can. I'll do what I can for you guys.
All right. Well, so this one showed up in a couple different places. Dealing with mono and stereo width.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're working on a mix, how do you think about mono compatibility? How do you think about spreading things out in a stereo field? Is that a big part of your thinking process?
Well, it depends on perspective and what kind of perspective I want to have as a listener. If I want to feel like I'm inside everything and inside the drums, then everything gets really panned hard left and right, and feel like you're in the middle of everything. If I want to feel like it's more of a everything's like you're in the room a little bit more, then I'll tend to pan some things in a bit, like drums, and I'll use the sides a bit more for for guitars and some of the more melodic elements. And then also it leaves you a little bit more room for reverb again, which is going to give you a little bit more of a sense of space. So it's just really a matter of where I want to feel like I am as a listener.
Yeah. So when it comes to, say specifically, there was a couple of questions here about kick drums and basses.
Uh-huh.
Do you use reverb on kicks, or are those always just clean and down the center?
I'd say about 30–40% of the time, maybe I'll add a little bit on the kick. Again, it comes down to perspective. If I want it to be really in my face, then no, then there's not going to be anything on it. But if I want to feel like it's a kit, and I feel like it's in a room or it's in a space, then I want all the drums to feel like they're in that same space.
Yeah.
And so usually I'll throw it all to the same reverb, which is some type of usually a room sound that's on the overall drum kit.
And so do you use like a high pass or anything to kind of clear up the bottom end from, because like sometimes I feel the low end going through a reverb just ends up with like kind of weird, muddy spatial stuff happening around it.
That's a good point. But if I'm feeling like I want the perspective to be a little farther back, I'll probably roll off a little low end on the kick to begin with. Again, just so for two reasons. First of all, so it doesn't feel lopsided in the stereo field. And then also the added benefit is that low end's not ending up in the reverb and doing weird stuff as well. So yeah, it's definitely a choice of perspective right off the bat. I mean, sometimes it's fun to just, blast a bunch of 60 hertz on a kick drum and maybe filter the really low stuff, right? But even when that hits a reverb, like you said, it'll get boingy, it'll get weird, and you have a whole other envelope then you're dealing with if you're dealing with the reverb decay. So
do you, so like with kick drums and with basses, I guess this is probably more prevalent in like electronic music where they're going for like a wide, synth or synth bass kind of thing. Do you use any plugins or tools to kind of narrow and focus the bass, or do you kind of just leave it wherever things are?
Well, for bass, it again, if it's a synth bass, sometimes it's cool to have it feel like it's coming from everywhere. And if that's the case, then yeah, I mean, I like chorusing on bass a lot. There's the UAD, the Dimension D style plugin they have. I like that a lot on bass in particular. Again, stylistically, you're right on. It's like sometimes, yes, if you want stuff to swim and to be all over the place. Sorry, it's a bad choice of words, but you know what I mean. If you want it to feel like it's big and wide,
yeah,
then yeah, I mean, I love chorusing. for those kinds of things. And I have some hardware stuff that I like to use too for that. So
what stuff in particular?
There's a Sony box called an M7, which is an old modulation box from the 90s. And I have a couple of presets that I've created for myself, and I use them on background vocals a lot, but also every once in a while on bass, because the thing tends to be a little bright.
Yeah.
So you get this added benefit of, I mean, it tends to be a little bright, and then you can also pre and post EQ it. And my presets tend to have a little brightness too, because a lot of the things I'm going for with that, see, I'm Italian, sorry, I'm talking with my hands a lot. You know, it'll actually enhance that outer stuff, which is what we, you know, if you really want to hear the chorusing, you know, filter out the low end, give it a little bit more brightness, and then you'll be able to get some imaging, and yet it won't take up a lot of space either.
So it's
low end.
So it's kind of subtle. It's working its magic up there and subtly, but you can use less of it because it's more prevalent in some ways.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you focus on like a more presence aspect of the sound, I mean, granted, sometimes if the bass is too deep, it's kind of difficult to dig that out. But if there's any type of presence to the source sound at all, then sometimes it's you know, you can use the chorusing to your advantage and make it feel like it's wide, but yet it really isn't. And then the other thing you could probably do, and I don't know if I've done this myself, but just thinking off the top of our head as we're talking, you know, you can always take that send, run it through some type of exciter program, and then hit the chorus.
Yeah.
You know, and that may be a way around a bass that's not bright enough to do what I'm talking about, so, or present enough. So.
And so when you're using like chorus effects or modulation effects, do you typically send to them, or do you insert them on a bass or something else?
I usually send. Part of that is just kind of the way I've grown up in the world and the way I think about putting things together. It's usually a send. Every once in a while, though, it's just like, no, I want this to be this, and I don't really care about the blend. I'm that way with compressors too. I rarely use the blend knob. If a compressor has a mix knob, I rarely use it. That's what the attack is for. And as far as, you know, that was always my philosophy. You know, slow down the attack if you want the peaks to come through, you know, and I actually like the personality of the box most of the time, hardware or software. So, you know, so that's, you know, sorry, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's just that tip there, though, of, you know, 'cause I agree with you. You know, the attack knob can kind of be your wet dry, especially with compressors, of like, slow it down so it doesn't react. You automatically get less compression that way.
Yeah, and you get the added benefit of the sound of whatever it is you're running it through, right? I mean, if you want to do it parallel, then I would say, you know, just set up a second track. I mean, that's the way I usually look at it. But I know people love it. People love the, you know, there's actually only one plugin that I ever use the mix knob on, and that's the Sound Toys Devil Lock Deluxe. It's the only time where every once in a while it's just a little too much, but 90% of the time it isn't. It works. So,
yeah, that plugin, it's one of my hands down favorite plugins.
I love that thing. Yeah, totally love that thing.
So still kind of keeping in this low end area, there's questions here about kick and bass. Like, how do you have some tricks that you use for finding the right relationship and getting them to like work together and not just fight each other the whole time?
It's usually, funny enough, it's usually a clarity factor for me. I've taken to doing this thing lately where I've been, I think it's Softtube makes the little Beatles, the little tone cubes. They have a little Abbey Road EQ thing. And I've been reading Brian Keyu's book, Brian and the other Brian, I can't remember the other author's name, the Recording the Beatles book.
Yeah.
And it talks about all this Beatles gear that was being used. And one of the things it talks about are these little presence boxes. And they have 3 bands on them, like 2.5, 3 something, and 10K. So I've just been taking one of them, and literally my preset when I open it up is 10 dB at 10K boost. And I'll put it on a kick drum. And I think I may have even done this during the mix-off thing I did with Fab not too long ago. And so it immediately just adds definition right off the bat. And sometimes it's too much, but that's what, you can always back it off. Yeah. And I find that if I create that kind of separation in the presence area, then it's a matter of just kind of figuring out the low end, what I want to feel like is carrying the record. Sometimes if it's a busy bass part, it depends on how it's been recorded. For me, it's all about the decay and hearing the space. You got to decide what's going to keep the flow of the record going and what's going to actually feel like you're kind of fighting. So,
and that kind of changes from song to song, right?
So, yeah, for the bass. Definitely, yeah. So some tunes the kick will lead, some songs the bass will lead. I like bass, especially if it's especially if it's something melodic and something that really has something to say. And so I'll almost try and focus on that sometimes and really make sure that's together. And but again, stylistically, if it's something that's more machine oriented, then I might look at it a little bit differently. But band stuff, the first thing I want to listen to is the bass. It's like, is this something that I'm excited about, or if the guy laid low, or guy or girl? And if that's the case, then season accordingly, basically.
Yeah. So let's a couple of questions here about doing mixes in the box versus outboard.
Okay.
I know you have an outboard setup. Do you mind could you show us real quick?
Yeah. Let me give you a quick let's see how I can do this and not get everybody seasick. So here is one of the racks of stuff. Sorry about the light.
No, that's cool. That's an assortment, man.
Yeah, do you see the distressor at the bottom? Did I get far enough down?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, great. And then that's one rack.
And so all these you're sending out of the box to this and then back in. Exactly.
Currently the curve bender and the backs are part of my stereo bus chain, so that usually ends up on the stereo bus all the time. Sometimes, depending on the song, I'll throw the Allen Smart in the chain as well, and it's all wired all together.
Yeah.
So it just acts as one insert, send and return. Okay, and then there's that, and then I'm going to start low on this rack. Can you see the EMI down there at the bottom?
Yeah, the TG limiter. Yep.
Yep. TG and the 2254, the LTD2s. Yeah. And yeah, and then these two got the LTD1s I use a lot for re-recording stuff as well. And then up top here, sorry if the glare's bad, but I think in one of the videos I talked about using pedals.
Yeah.
And so this is what I use the Little Labs guy for most of the time. I actually use it as send and return to get to my guitar pedals.
Nice. And so do you use those on every mix, or is that just
it just depends on what I'm imagining in my head. And then here's the last little bit of stuff too. There's a Spectrasonic 610 down there at the bottom. And then my converter and stuff like that. And then I have a couple of Apogee, a couple of Universal Audio Apollos as well.
Right. You have just the right amount of stuff to be dangerous with.
Yeah, and there's more in my storage locker. This is just all the stuff I can fit in this room. So and have enough patch bay space for. But I have another patch bay ready to go. So
move to a bigger house. Suddenly, this whole thing is going to blow up.
Yeah, there'll be another at least 2 or 3 6-space or 3 or 4 6-space racks full of stuff. At least that'll be available. So
yeah.
So
yeah. Using the whole point of kind of showing off all the outboard gear is mentally, how do you pick between doing something in the box and UAD plugins, using a very convenient tool versus going out of the box and patching something into your rack?
If I feel like I need more size on things, I mean, there's some really good plugins, don't get me wrong, but if I feel like I need brute force size on something, then nothing still beats the outboard gear for me. Sorry, my screensaver just went on and the lighting changed, so on my main computer. So yeah, so it's a size, it's just getting the size of the track for me. And plugins are awesome for fine tuning stuff, especially, you know, I mean, I've been using the AE600 a bunch, and that's really fastly, it's quickly become my favorite EQ for that kind of stuff, especially, you know, fine tuning stuff, finding little things to fix, and it's great for that. So, but you know, but I can't beat the sound of, you know, I mean, I have an EAR 660 in my rack, and that on a vocal or that on an acoustic guitar, even if I have to re-record it, it's totally worth doing. So.
And is the, you know, because that was the biggest thing I took away from your Robbie Williams tutorials, kind of taking things out of the box, processing it, and then committing that back into Pro Tools. Is that how did that technique come up?
Well, it just stems from how I like to make records, period. You know, I mean, I came up with tape, I came up in studios, you know, fortunately. And, you know, you had 24 tracks and you had to make it work mostly on one tape machine a lot of time, right? So the whole goal is for you to push up the faders and put them all in a row and have it sound like the record. And, you know, so that's kind of my guiding philosophy. You know, you get a lot of sessions now, like the thing I was mixing today, or the project I'm on at the moment. There's 3 kick drums, there's 2 snare drums, and, you know, there's a kick in, there's a kick out, and there's a kick sub. And, you know, what I will do is I will just take all of those, find a blend that I like of the 3 that sounds like a bass drum, and I will combine them all down. I'll run them through one of the LTD1s a lot of time, just for a little bit of EQ, or if I feel like it needs something else, record it back in, and then I just, you know, I'll turn off the other 3 tracks. You know, it's a lot less to deal with.
Yeah.
You know, and you make decisions. And honestly, if I do something like this tune yesterday, I went through, I printed it, and then I'm working with the track a little bit more, and it's like, oh no, I blew it. And most of the time I don't, but every once in a while I do. And there was something weird between the phase of the inside kick and the outside kick that was bugging me. So I threw on the software version of Jonathan Little's IBP.
Yeah.
The UAD IBP. Popped that on the inside kick, and I just moved it till it felt right. And then I just reprinted it, you know, through the EQ again. And then I haven't looked back. And
so it's there, and that's your kick drum sound now. It is one track. Yeah. It is there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, same thing I do with guitars. Like a lot of people, they record, you know, they'll record a Royer and a 57 and something else, or, you know, or those 2 mics and a room mic, or a 421. And sometimes it's, you know, it's just a lot, you know, I understand why people do it. They want choices. They want to have different sounds. But to me, it's all about making decisions and committing. You know, and at that point in the game, then it's kind of easy for me to do that. You know, I can just get a blend, you know, that sounds like what I want it to sound like. Again, run it out through some EQ if I want to, or some compression, or you know, whatever. I do that as well a lot. Like I have a bass setup that I really love for DI bass that it just gives me a little bit more size and a little bit more tone. You know, I showed it a little bit in the Robbie Williams thing. I mean, it's basically that. You know, that route, you know, it's a couple of different pieces of gear, but, you know, same idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So talking about, you know, coming up on consoles, so your ears are very well in tune with that kind of sound. Do you ever find yourself reaching for like console emulation plugins, like the Slate or Waves stuff?
No, actually. You know, here's the thing. It's like, I don't see the benefit in that stuff, really. I mean, there are companies that make them. I get that. And, but unless you've got it on every single channel and you have it on what you're using as your stereo bus, you know, and even then it's still not a console. You're not running into the headroom issues. I mean, you know, in 8078, if you hit it too hard, it would fold. The stereo bus would fold. So you'd have, so unless it's going to emulate all of that stuff, but your whole thinking on a console is way different, right? You're looking at VU meters, so you're thinking about average level, and you're making sure that your kick and your snare are barely moving when you're recording, right? On a VU meter. And your bass, you want your bass to come up towards 0 VU, and all of those things. Your whole mindset's different. And I mean, I get why people do it, but at the same time, it's just like, if you really want that sound, maybe you should just, get down on
yeah,
get a console and do it,
You feel like because a lot of times projects now are tracked, so or at least the projects that you and I work on, like we track them in nice studios with great gear on the way in. Do you feel like it's kind of duplicating to like adding tape plugins, adding console plugins, and then going through analog sound? Doing all these extra steps in the process, do they really add to the mix? Do they make it have more feel, more emotions, more like interest?
I think that comes down to the operator at that point, right? Because it all comes down to personal choice. I mean, if you think about it, if you're into classic records, they were done on a console, really classic records before this whole phenomenon of the Star Mixer came along. They may have all been recorded and mixed on the same console. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's, so it went to tape, it went to 15 IPS most likely, no noise reduction, came back out through the same console and went to a half-inch machine or a quarter-inch machine, So, I think it just comes down to just knowing your tools and understanding what they do and what kind of benefit you want, and for me personally, because I've come up from, certain things, used to certain things, like even my ATR plugin that I use, the UAD ATR, I always use it at quarter-inch. I never use it at half-inch, just because that's kind of it's the sound I expect. It's what I did when I used to mix the tape.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? So some of it's that, and it's a matter of just exploring the tools at the end of the day,
So how, thinking now kind of in terms of your career, how long did it take you, you've been doing this for how many years?
Oh, 20 plus. I've been in LA like 26 years now, I think 26, 27 years, and started basically when I moved out here. So, yeah.
So how long did it take you to get to like feeling comfortable with making decisions, making commitments, to really, feeling like, okay, I have a sound that I want, and here's how I'm going to get it. You do it, deliver it, and give it, feeling confidence in your mixes. This is a big thing that there's like 3 or 4 questions here asking about, like, how do you get this experience, especially thinking in the context of, 2017, where they're not going to have the opportunity necessarily to go intern or assist at studios.
Right.
How do we give people these experiences nowadays?
That's a really interesting question, because, you learn in the studio by watching people, and you learn a ton by watching interactions, by, that's the real thing about making records. It's not the gear, it's not about going through school and being Pro Tools certified, or, or whatever, I mean, all that stuff's cool to a certain degree. Your tools, great. Your way around a computer, great. But knowing when to say something and knowing when to not say something, watching interactions and all of that stuff adds up. So getting back to your question, how does this translate at the end? When do you feel confident? You gotta just go for it. I mean, the good thing about this is it's not brain surgery. If you screw up, it's like no one gets hurt. It's just music. And to develop your confidence, you just got to do it, and you got to not be afraid to fail. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of times where I, the first couple of times I engineered for Mitchell Froom, which was a big deal for me. I was really nervous about it, right? Because Chad wasn't there, and I was like sitting in for Chad Blake, and and it's like, crap, I got to do a good job with this. And you know, so there's pressure, and you always want to make sure, and, you know, you want to make sure you're honored that your mentor, you want to make sure that it all fits into the whole scheme of what's going on. And, you know, but, you know, I remember distinctly pushing up a fader one time, going for this thing. We recorded it for a second, and I stopped the tape machine. And I said, this is wrong. This is the wrong sound. Can you just give me another second? And Mitchell was cool about it. You know, he looked at me for a second, you know, but I'm like, look, I think it needs to be this. Just let me do this. And blah, 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 blah. You know, everybody's happy, and off we go.
Yeah.
So, you know, but it does take time to develop that kind of confidence. But you have to be willing to say you're wrong, and you have to be willing to make a mistake. I mean, that's the thing about a lot of modern record making, right? Everybody's so afraid, and that's why I get 3 tracks of guitar mics on every guitar. You know, that's why there's, you know, so many drum mics on everything, and you know, people are worried about making a mistake, and you can't. I don't know.
Because in some ways, like that fear ends up, you know, yeah, you're trying to cover your bases. You're trying to have options for later on.
Right.
But it also means that you're not listening as actively in the moment. Like, you're not in the session. Does this vocal sound how I want it to sound? Does this guitar tone, is this what I want?
Right.
You're not thinking that way at all.
Right. Absolutely. You know, but it's tricky though. But that's something that develops over time, because you have to imagine how things are going as well. You know, especially, I mean, it's way easier when you have a band and everybody's set up at the same time, even if it's not an actual band, even if it's just a rhythm section, right? You can create the foundation of the record right then and there. I mean, that's when you do create, as far as I'm concerned, that's when you create it. You know, you decide, am I going to use 2 mics on the drums, or if I'm going to use a dozen mics on the drums? What are we going for? Is it going to be a bass DI and an amp, or just a DI? Is the guitar acoustic? Is it electric? How are we going to overdub this? And the nice part about tracking that kind of thing is everybody's there all at once. You make the decisions, and then that's that. What's more tricky is, okay, I got to farm off this drum track to this guy in Nashville, or oh, my buddy in Miami's going to play guitar on this, and you know what I mean? So then it comes back, and it's a bit of a different thing, because you got to hope they understand sonically what you're going for. As a producer, if you're not Skyping it, or if you're not source connecting it, then that's a whole other thing. You know, then it's like, okay, you get it back, and then I got to fit it into, you know, into the context. So
yeah, it just becomes a whole big wild card of, like, it could sound however they thought it should sound, and it's up to you to now.
Right. Yeah. No, but what's interesting is, you know, and this is the little quandary you get into, right? Because, like, you hire somebody because you like what they do, or you like their sound, or you like their playing, and then you just have to trust to a certain degree that they're going to bring what you need, right? And then, you know, hopefully you give them a little direction. Early on, I'd work with this producer who, you know, he's a good musician, but he'd have a session player in, and the session player would start figuring out the tune. I don't know if I told anybody this story before on Puremix, but the session player would start figuring out the tune, and before you know it, the producer's like, oh no, play the C sharp in the bass over the E chord, and then lead this and voice lead this up. You know, you can feel the musician kind of turn off, because they're not doing their thing. They haven't even figured out the song yet, and they're already being directed into something. So it's a funny quandary, you know, learning how to guide people into what it is you want, but also getting the best out of them at the same time. You know, it's quite the game right down the line, you know, from singers, from you know, and mixers too. You know, you hire somebody to mix your thing, and you know, do they get it? Do they not get it? And, you know, hopefully they do, or hopefully they're going to be flexible, or they're going to ask questions right off the bat, and, you know, stuff like that.
Well, there's actually a question related to this in here of, do you let clients sit in on mixes?
At this point, actually, honestly, I never really like to. I like to have them come in when I have a vision together, at least. Even when I was mixing on consoles, I would always, because I was just having this conversation yesterday with the singer, actually, who was here. And you know, because she was here while I tuned her vocal once or a little bit while she was here, which I never do in front of clients either. I never tune and I never mix in front of people, because what happens is you're getting the mix together and someone's out of the room. Then they come in the room. The moment you put up the vocal or you put up something just for a reference to hear context, and then they start commenting on the thing you just pulled up.
Yep.
So I'm kind of, I've got my faders and I'm moving, right? I'm doing my thing and I'm thinking about the next 5 or 6 moves, right? Because I'm in the zone, just like you're playing, just like you're driving a car, just like anything, right? You're in the zone. You're trying to like kind of get caught on this wave, trying to feel like you're getting someplace. And then you have to stop, and then you have to address the person, and you have to say, okay, this is not why I'm doing this. This is what this. And then for me personally, by the time I turn back around, it's like, okay, where was I?
Yeah.
And there goes that wave. You know what I mean?
It brings the whole car to a halt, and you're like, how do I get up to 60 miles an hour again?
Exactly. You know, so I kind of, you know, very respectfully just asked, you know, hey, you know, can you just give me a little time to get it going? And you know, 99% of the time it's been, you know, it's been fine. And then a lot of the stuff I mix clients aren't around anyway. They're out of the country, or they're in another state, or they're across town, and it's not easy for them to drive over here, you know?
Yeah.
What I do a lot with clients is I get mixes going and we get them as close as we can get them. And then if they feel like they need to be here for, you know, for tweaks, then great. Because sometimes it's not easy to describe something in writing or even over the phone, you know, and if that's the case, then yeah, then you just open up 10 tunes, you spend an afternoon doing it. That's what we did with Steve Porcaro last year. You know, I mixed his whole record in about a week. And then he came by toward the end and we went up, you know, each tune and tweak this. Oh yeah, this ride, this thing, this relationship. Piece of cake. You know, it's a really efficient way to work. And the other thing too, I found, sorry, I'm talking your ear off, Ben.
This is all, no, dude, this is
Everybody's
exactly what we're doing this for. Because this is all, it all relates to the question of, you know, clients, like how to deal with it. This is something that we can't really put this into a tutorial form necessarily. So this is
true. No, you're absolutely right. Unless you film the client and then you have commentary later on.
Yeah, exactly.
Then it becomes a Real Housewives episode. Which, hey, that might work.
It could work, man. I'll pitch it to Bravo. We'll see. We'll have Puremix on TV.
Perfect. Yeah, let me and Fab do it, and then we can talk about each other behind each other's back. It'll be beautiful.
You guys already do enough of that as is. So.
Well, we do it in front of each other. It'll be even better if we do it off camera.
Yeah.
But anyway, the one other thing I wanted to add was I think I found it very beneficial to have clients listen on speakers that they know and in systems they know. So when they come here, I love the way my speakers sound. And I think they sound really good and I think they sound accurate, but it's still a foreign environment for them. So for that to happen, you know, there's a little adjustment period and you know, there's nothing worse than someone saying, oh, it needs more bass. We got to add more bass. And they take it home. They go, oh, we added too much bass. So, you know.
Well, it's funny you bring up monitoring here. I had a question from Victor about, you know, he's got Yamaha HS8s, which to him he says, you know, they sound great. They sound flat and clear, but he knows that they're not the most expensive or most professional speakers. What do you advise to people in terms of speakers? Like, how do you find a pair that are good enough to like be working and be professional, and or how do you learn a set of speakers so that it doesn't even matter what you're using? Well,
okay. The other factor with this is the room that they're in, because that changes things significantally. When I track, I have a set of speakers, an old set of NHT Pros that I bring with me everywhere I go.
Yeah.
They're called like M20s or something like that. I don't remember the model off the top. I think they're M20s. And the whole reason I bought them was because I love the mid-range detail, because I came up on NS10s. I don't use them anymore. But I love the mid-range detail. And then plus they had EQ compensation on the low end and on the top end. So if I went to a room where the low end didn't seem right, I can add a little bit more, or I can take some out, so I can get the speakers to sound the way I want them to sound. Okay, I would play reference music. I have I have probably a half a dozen tunes that I use just to understand just to understand where I am in the room. I always play something in mono because every once in a while someone's hooked up a set of speakers backwards. Easiest way to tell. Play something in mono. If your head's gonna peel off, then something's wrong.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Trying speakers can be difficult. I mean, it's actually a lot easier now than it used to be. If you're hooked up with a dealer at all, either they have demo pairs or if you have a relationship with somebody, you may be able to get stuff to try. Granted, if you're, I should say the caveat, I'm saying that living in a large city where I can call 4 different dealers and say, hey, I want to check these out, and they'll show up, or I can go pick them up. Granted, if you're someplace else, it's a little bit more tricky. There's all kinds of philosophies with speakers. You can get ones that are clinically flat, you can get ones that are accurate, or you can get ones that sound musical to you. And here, one other quick spin. Here's what I have going on. These are my main monitors.
Focal Twins.
Focal Twins.
Yep.
And then these NHT M00s.
And those are the ones that you take with you when you go somewhere new.
Well, no, these are actually a smaller version. These are called the M00 Moo, affectionately, and then they have a sub along with them that I actually use. But the Focals, I don't use a sub.
Gotcha.
And but when I tried out the Focals, I brought my reference music and I checked out the I think they were SM11s.
SM9s?
Yes, there were 9s, and then the solo 6s and the twin 6s. And for me, the twins made my record sound like me. And that's the funny thing about speakers. There's some speakers I never liked. I would write to studios, like I'd send a setup list to a studio, and I'm like, if you have this brand of speaker on your console, take it out of the room, because I don't even want the producer to turn it on. So because they don't make sense to me. And then if you have to deal with that, struggle back and forth, then the fun factor goes low, and then you start questioning everything. Room treatment is important. Where your speakers are, if they're on a console versus if they're on a desktop or stands behind, all of these things, and it all involves experimentation. I would never use NS10s in my situation that I have here.
Why's that?
Because they don't sound, quote unquote, right to me. They don't sound musical to me. For some reason, NS10s on a console, because of this reflection factor that you get from the console, it does something to where you can actually hear a decent amount of low end and things, again, and part of it's what I grew up with for a long time. I spent a good portion of my career listening to those things. So, so when they're not in those, when they're not in that environment, then it's a different thing. But, and then beyond that, it's learning, having pieces of music that you love and that what they sound like.
Yeah,
and it doesn't have to be a lot. It can just be a couple of things, but where that low end sits. And I have a couple of pieces that I do that with, And
there's a couple of questions, in here of like, what reference music do you listen to?
There's a Los Lobos tune called Dreamin' Blue. It's the first tune on Kiko. Okay. And there's something about the kick drum on that and where the low end sits. And there's a really, really low octave that you should just hear just a little bit. Hear it too much, and there's too much low end in the room, in my opinion. Okay. And if you're not hearing it at all, then the speakers are in the wrong place, or there's not enough low end. That's one thing. you know, other things I like to listen for when I go into a room is how much reverb there is. There's a Nat King Cole tune called "The Very Heart of You," I believe. Wait. Oh, there are things not to do. Sorry, I got to get to the chorus in my head. Yeah, it's "The Very Thought of You."
Okay.
It is an amazing arrangement. It's an amazing vocal, and it's recorded beautifully. There is a low octave that comes through, even on the CD version. That's another one of my references. I put it up, and people look at me like, you know, what are you listening to?
Yeah.
And you know, but again, it's something that I've learned, and it's something that I picked out, and it is something that just helps me really figure out where I am in the room. Plus, the reverb on that particular track is beautiful, and if you're really hearing it, then you know what kind of ambience you're talking about. And then "You Shook Me All Night Long" by AC/DC is another favorite as well. So usually with those three tunes, I can kind of figure it out. And then my mono things are always "Ticket to Ride," the mono version by the Beatles, and "Paperback Writer," the mono version, the mono mix, because the mono mix is killer.
Wow.
So it's just like drinking coffee for me. That, or I saw her standing there, actually, you know. It's just an exciting thing to put on right off the bat when you go into a room. And granted, I know these are older kind of references. There's a lot of great things, you know, that I've heard recently too. I do have, I've got a longer Pro Tools session that I also bring, and I open up and I just bring it into a 2-track return and I listen. It's the other thing too. If you're in a new room, just listening to stuff, you know, even if it's just on while you're setting up your gear, really helps me at least acclimate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question here from Chris, who's wondering, you know, there's large changes and shifts in the music industry in general. What is the market looking like for producers and engineers? How, you know, obviously you have an established network, you have Grammys, you have your network of people who call you and you know, want you to do their records. What do you see that evolving for people, and how can we start getting, you know, people work when they are stuck in the middle of the country instead of, you know, on the coast?
Well, it's, you know, it's always this evolving thing. I mean, it's funny, when I was assisting, somebody had said to me, "Oh, you know, things aren't as good as they used to be," you know, and I think it's just everybody, you know, you come from one world and you morph to another, right? So I have my history, but a young person starting out doesn't, and that's good and it's bad. What's good is that it's good. You're going to take chances that I would never ever think of taking. You know, what it doesn't have is it doesn't have a network, and you know, networks are networks. You stay in touch with people you went to school with. You get involved with musicians. You play, you know, you go to see shows. You do all of these things, you know, and you stay in touch with. I mean, my first jobs when I moved to LA were all through people I knew from University of Miami.
Yeah.
You know, I met Fab at a potluck conference, you know, Tape Op Mag's potluck, when they used to do that. You know, we were on a panel together. I met Vance Powell the same way. You know, you network with people and you meet people. You go to hear bands. You like the band, you get in touch with them. I went to go hear somebody recently, got there early, heard the opening act, really loved the opening act, loved it actually more than the guy I was there to see. And I'm in touch with the guy with the opening act. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so these are the things you do, you know.
It's being active. It's being proactive about like trying to find work, trying to find cool things. Ultimately, that's what people buy, right? Is they buy the next cool thing, the next cool artist, the next cool piece of gear. Like that's what the market is there for, something new and original and unique.
Yeah, no, and that's what drives things forward. You gotta find people, you know, find people that will either pay for your services or find people you want to work with at first. And if they don't have a lot of money, then you find a way to make it happen because it's cool. I mean, you know, I've worked on some cool things and I've gotten cool calls from people, and still people to this day. And it's not the high profile stuff. It's this record that I did, you know, called The Blue Horn. That's a trio thing. That sounds really cool. Yeah. Or this other girl named Mia Doy Todd that, you know, I don't know how many records it sold, but it sounds cool. And, you know, so
something you want to show off then, right? Is like,
yeah,
listen to this cool thing I made.
Right.
It may not sell, you know, thousands of copies, but this shows off my abilities with something paired with great art, you know?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And then that's, you know, and then that gets into the whole thing is like, well, where are you, what's your career about? What is it you're trying to do? You know, and that's it's a whole other ball game. You know, one of my best friends, he does heavy records. That's all he does. Made a great career out of it. You know, I don't know if I could ever do that because you know, I like singer-songwriters. I like instrumental music. I like pop stuff. You know, it's just gotta hit me a certain way. So, but you know, you rarely go wrong when you find things that interest you or that you really love, you know, at the end of the day.
There you go. How do you handle it when you get feedback from a client that is, you know, you don't agree with? You know, it's not just an ego thing, but it's, you know, they're literally asking for the vocal to be 12 dB louder. How do you mitigate crazy, you know,
Oh, mitigate crazy. That's good. I like that. Tactfully, number one. Number two, you know, it's their record at the end of the day. And you know, you can lodge a formal objection and just say, look, this isn't right. And it's not right for this, and this reason. And you know, but at the end of the day, you know, if you're hired to do a gig, you do the gig. And if it's really awful, then you know, then you part ways, you know, or that client calls back and you're like, no, I can't do this, or suddenly you're busy, or your rate doubles, you know. But every once in a while, the rate doubling thing doesn't work because then they actually still want to use you, and then you're in the same boat. And granted, it's more money, but is it worth all the, you know, all the headache, you know?
Yep.
And you know, it just depends on you know, what you want to put up with. And you know, I mean, I'm fortunate. I really haven't had to deal with that all that much. Kevin Killen gave me a piece of advice early on. He said, never take a gig just for the money. And the few times you do, it's not good. And I have other people in my life, same thing. It's like they're doing, you know, they've done something for the money, and then it's just, you know, it's very freeing when it's done because you realize that you know, your heart wasn't in it and you were doing it for the wrong reasons. I mean, you know,
that's so important, man, because it's really easy to, especially when, you know, getting money is a fresh thing, to just take anything that you can get. You know, $50, you know, taking a gig that you can is not necessarily the best strategy for building a long career.
Well, I mean, it depends on where you are in your career. If you're at the point, well, man, here we go. It's all going wrong.
Oh, no.
It's all going right. There we go. Well, hello, Fab.
How you doing, boss?
I'm good. How are you? Nice to see you. You guys are in the room with my favorite piano on the planet, and I've never even gotten to record it yet. I just love the way it sounds.
Well, I guess as long as I have both of you guys here, let's. There's been a question that's been bubbling up both in our Puremixers group and also on the forum. People want to know about sample rates. What do you? How do you two deal with sample rates?
Sample rate discussion is for pussies. Let's talk about dithering. That's fun. All right, so yeah, sure. Sample rate. What's the question?
What do you use?
It depends. Half the time I use what's been imposed on me by the producer of the record if I'm just mixing. So that usually is 44, which is great, because I'm gonna say something that sounds bad, but everybody's used to it, so I'm just gonna say it. Because most of the time, recording at a higher sample rate would not have compensated for how bad this stuff is recorded anyway.
Very true.
So that's one. That if I mix I have a rule.
Yeah.
I have a rule. Yeah. If I produce a record If there's more than 24 tracks, 44K. If there's less than 24 tracks, I'll do 88K.
It's a fair rule.
Yeah, since the reason for that is because the computers are not ready to handle the amount of processing required to make a record sound the way people expect it to sound. And for that to happen at 88K, if there's a lot of tracks. That's it. So the Cyril Aimé record is 44.
Yeah.
Some nefarious person who did not get fired because they're otherwise very nice, who works for me, set the Magda record at 88K, knowing full well that Magda is completely insane and that it will end up being 200 and something tracks. And sure enough, Tam Tam is one of the songs I first mixed, and she did overdubs by herself, and it came in at 200 and something tracks, but Pro Tools can only play 128 tracks at 88K. And so consequently, I spent a whole day paring it down and doing submixes to be able to hear the arrangement. And then when I asked her, I said, Magda, you sent me a 200 track session at 88K. She said, I did. I said, yes, you did. You know, you did too. And she said, okay. And I said, doesn't it not bother you that you kept overdubbing stuff over stuff that you were not hearing and that you never heard any of it played together at once? That the first time you're going to hear everything played together is when I send you the mix. And she said, I kid you not, I trust you. And I said, that is the wrong answer. The real answer is, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. That's the proper answer. So 44K, above 24 tracks. And if the music warrants it, 88K above 24 tracks. But the thing is that if it's going to be like a tweaky record, compressors sound better to me at 88K. Like the plugins are a little easier to manage, but overall with the processing, yeah. If you're gonna do like the Cross records at 88K, you know.
Yeah. How about you, John? Do you have any rules that you follow for sample rates?
I don't like 44.1 at all. I don't think it sounds good. I don't think plugins sound as good, and I get 44.1 sessions, and probably 80% of the time I bump it up to at least 48K, just so that my inserts all sound good and all that other stuff. If I could work at 48K 24-bit all day long, I'm totally happy with that. 88 I like. 96, I have to do an experiment, but I ran into this thing at one point where I was mixing a session at 96K, ran out of processing, converted the whole thing down to 48K, hit play, and the mix sounded better at 48K.
Yep.
It felt better at 48K. This was on a TDM system. Well, so I spent a whole day basically going back and forth trying to figure out why it felt different. Sending stuff off to my best friend who I totally trust. And every time he picked the 48K mix, as did I. And I even went the other way. I even went 48 to 96, sample rate converted that way. Did it with plugins, did it without plugins, same balance. 48K felt better. So, you know, I haven't done that since I've been off TDM, so it may be different with the new versions of Pro Tools, but yeah, and honestly, I really don't like the sound of 44.1. I don't like the sound of CDs. I would much rather, you know, 48K for me, it just sounds much better. So
that's it's what's cool to hear though in both of these is it's a practical thing.
Yeah.
And it's a sonic thing. And it's both of these things together that you have to take into consideration, because not just a straight ahead like 96 is better because it's more data. It's not, that isn't the case.
Right. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I've recorded both ways. Like I said, I have to do this. I have to do another round of 96 versus 48, just to really see. But that's kind of, you know, that's how I've come to it anyway. So
things have changed because the converters. I know this from just tuning a bunch of converters. The chip is designed to work natively at 96. Everything else is a mathematical trick. So, and that is, you know, in the last 5 years because of the advancements in chips. It used to be that you got 96K by overclocking a 48K chip, and then 44 was a trick. It used to be before that 44 was all you could get, right? So the native sample rate of the actual chip inside the converter makes a difference. And so that I heard that. I personally, I disagree with John. The difference between 44 and 48 for me, it's different. I hear a difference. I don't know if I like it. If I could call one over the other better. Like I've never been in a situation with a 44K where I could like, when I tell myself, oh, this sounds bad, or maybe it sounds bad, but the last thing I want to blame is the conversion, you know, or the sample rate. I was like,
the other thing for me too, it's like sitting in front of speakers all day long at a 48K versus a 44.1 session. I think I'm more tired at the end of a 44.1 day. I think it's more work. And honestly, when I make my MP3s for clients, I would love to send them 48K MP3s as opposed to 44.1 because they sound different to me as well. But I usually can't get away with it because at the end of the day, you know, iTunes is only 44.1.
Yeah.
And that's where we're really screwed in that sense because they're not even embracing, even on an MP3 level, a higher sample rate. And I think the higher sample rate makes a difference.
So we're coming up here on an hour. John, I want to thank you so much for putting in this time and answering all these questions from our members.
We can go a little longer if you want. If you want to go a little longer, that's fine. If not, you know, I'm cool.
I saved one good one for last for the two of you.
Okay.
So I would actually like you guys to frame this kind of as a challenge to everybody that's here watching us right now. How can people? What can they do to be more creative when it comes to mixing or recording? What's like one thing that you would challenge all the peer mixers to go out and try this week that would just give them something a little bit different to do?
I wrote a whole thing on that. Did you publish it yet?
So go read John's article. That's
No, did you publish it? I don't know if you did or not.
I haven't published that yet. It's coming out this week.
Okay. All right. So then I'll do the first one on my list, which is set your monitoring to mono, pan the stuff where you think it should be, and mix for the first couple of hours in mono. And force yourself to EQ it and to make it happen in mono. And then pop it out, leave the EQs where they are, and finish it up.
That's a good one.
What do you got, Fab?
Me, listen to something you haven't listened to before. You know, if you hate top 40, listen to top 40 this week.
Yeah.
If you hate heavy metal, find something you like in the heavy metal record somewhere in the world. And that's the only way for me to progress is to listen to other things.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. The mono trick is good though. I mean, now you're talking about like while you're sitting at it, what else are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Use another plugin. That'll fuck you up.
Yeah.
Like instead of using the same plugin you use every day, use another one.
There you go. Did Fab proofread my article? Because I think I talked about that in there too. All right, time to publish, Ben.
Yeah. It's not there.
No, that's what I said too. I also talked about listening to hard music, stuff that you wouldn't normally listen to, or stuff that challenges you in some way.
I still do it every day, man. Remember the question, like, when was it? Like 800 years ago we had? I still come in every day, every morning, and I still put on at least 1 or 2 songs that I haven't heard before. And I check one new tool that I haven't heard before every day, no matter what happens. Still to this day, I'll check something out. Right now, I have a backlog of like probably 100 plugins I'm supposed to try. Like, you know, I was just exchanging emails with Colin, a Mac DSP. Because I saw him at night and I said, hey, how you doing? He says, oh, I'm fine. You know, Colin speaks fast and loud and everything.
He's awesome though. I love Colin.
And he said, hey, have you checked out this? And oh, this is great, and golly, this is wonderful. I'm like, that's my DSP plugin, and I'm about 4 versions behind. I can't keep up.
Oh yeah.
So I have to keep. I have to check out. He has a whole rack of stuff, like modular stuff that went way over my head. He had a tape echo plugin.
That's not out yet. That'll be out soon. But if you haven't tried the AE600, I mentioned that earlier. It's great. It's my favorite EQ plugin. He's going to make one little change, I hope, in the next revision. I'm not going to bust his chops about it here publicly, but he knows what I want him to do. And if he does that, then it'll be my EQ plugin going forward for a long time. AE600.
What does it do?
It's a combination of the AE400 and well, not a combination. It's 6 bands of EQ.
Okay.
Actually, 12 bands. 6 of them are fixed, and 6 of them are dynamic.
Oh.
And then within each band, you can change characteristics of each band. So you can do different back shapes if you want. You can do high Q. You can do a narrowing Q as you increase the gain.
Nice.
And you can do it for the fixed bands, and you can also do it for the dynamic bands. It's badass. And he put a high and low cut filters on it. 6 and 12 dB worth of slope. Really, really useful. Really musical, as Colin always is.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really great. I love it. I love it.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to check it out.
Try that at 48K though.
48K. Well, I'm not. My ears are not good enough to be able to tell the difference. So I'm just gonna stick to 44.
All right, it'll work there too.
All right.
Well, guys, John, Fab, thank you. Mainly John, a little bit.
Yeah,
Fab.
I'm glad you showed up. I'm glad you showed up. No, this is great.
You, brother.
I know.
All right.
All right.
Sweet. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in and for all
thanks
your
for
questions.
And if there's follow-up stuff, post it on the Puremix Facebook page, and I'll answer stuff if you want more detail. I'll keep an eye out.
Yep.
Definitely.
And also make sure to watch John's tutorials, because those are hours and hours of endless entertainment and information back to back.
Yeah, and talking with the hands too, I think, quite a bit. So yeah, there we go. A little of this, a little of that.
A little of that. Yeah.
Exactly. Perfect.
Great.
No, my pleasure. Thanks, and thanks for checking out the videos. I really appreciate you guys watching.
Ciao, guys.
Ciao, ciao.